My name is Noor Hamada, and my project is called Sex, Ruins, and Third Space Queer Production and Heritage Restoration in Beirut. The etymology of the term queer stems from the original word Turk meaning to twist, to the German word queer. It becomes an expression for something that's perverse or off center. The Scottish idiom is the act of ruining or spoiling, and since in an eccentric, peculiar state. Queer provides a sense of undefined abstractness, used to describe those who exist outside of societal norms or of what society mandates. So the third space could be described as an interstitial passage, that which is situated between cultures, fixed identities, and their implicit hierarchy. Hannah Arendt explains how this space of appearance predates the public sphere as a formal construction. It exists when speech and action is done in the presence of others. So the term public implies the highest level of inclusivity. Habermas coined the term public sphere, understood as the domain of social life where public opinions can be formed, shaped, and expressed. The citizen, or the body, takes on the role of a private person, one who is not acting on behalf of an institution or private interests. The model presents an explicit dichotomy between private dominion and public autonomy. Lebanon is a parliamentary democracy, a de jure mix of religion and politics operating in the scope of confessionalism, a sectarian state where religion usually acts as the main denominator in dividing and joining the common. It lies as a focal element in culture, society, politics, and the legal structure, which combines basic common laws that apply to all 18 religious sects. A queer situation refers to an anonymous condition in relation to what we perceive as normative. معهم خبر بس ما بيحكوا. They know, but they just don't talk. Act 1. As an introduction, the closet presents itself as a mundane object within the home. A chest dating back to ancient Egypt, and by the late 14th century, it became known as a small enclosure or private room for study or prayer. The boudoir presents a radical form of the closet. It arose during Enlightenment France alongside the augmented demand for autonomy and privacy. The bourgeoisie symbolically designed, formed, and sexualized a class body, asserting their dominance as well as specific class effects. To pout, sulk, think, or retreat, the erotically saturated space situates itself in on the far side of the feminine spectrum. Female voices radicalize the space by shifting their silence into intellectual conversations between themselves, thus forming a third space. The following images convey a comparison between women and the boudoir and the present-day experiences of queer Lebanese folks. Queer existence in Lebanon is somewhat ambiguous. Since Lebanon's independence in 1943, homosexual activity was accounted as illegal and punishment attended to imprisonment of up to 1 year. Article 534, a relic of the French Mandate, criminalizes sexual intercourse against nature, and Article 521 criminalizes gender expression by making an offense for a man to disguise himself as a woman. The performative bodied practice of gendering for specifically young Lebanese gay men must remain hidden by subtle gestures and acts of seduction. Bodies could be arbitrarily detained for a simple suspicion of homosexual behavior, so the ultimate mode of correct behavior is the formation of an artificial appearance, or the commonly known as passing as straight. Imposed in the triple edict of taboo, non-existence, and silence, queer bodies were forced to examine the possibilities of space. The cyber, or technosphere, serves as a modern method of appropriation, abstracting space. Underground spaces have still erected and are now scattered around the fragmented city, enabling the community to appear, overground, and develop scenes in which discussions on identity, sexuality, sex, love, and being could take place. So the boudoir became the image of privatization of gendered space, where the complete and imaginative use of the binary as an ordering device is exploited. It's the result of the juxtaposition between physical fact and psychic effect, representing the ambiguity of space. So essentially, queer space is a space of activism and inclusion, a space of transient permanence which evolves with legislations, acceptance, and publicity. Women in the lower classes in Enlightenment France, as well as present queer individuals in Lebanon, are rendered illegal, without a public voice. 19 bodies, looming from different sects of life, suffer different path. Sara Ahmed describes how the straight body is prescribed a linear path and is presented with life markers they must meet, whilst queer bodies experience disorientation. Moving against the horizontal and vertical axes, this involves becoming an object. With their identities increasingly defined within the confined context of their imagination, or the silence of familial order, disorientated bodies can be defensive, representing information from a diverse group of inhabitants, dealing with everyday life disruptions and understanding the group's urgent and long-term needs. So on the 4th of August of 2020, an explosion erupted at the main port of Beirut, killing over 200 people and impacting infrastructure, homes, and bodies more than 10 kilometers away. People were left in a state of isolation where systems of care and solidarity are lost. Parallel to the post-Civil War period in Beirut, this serves as a platform for potential possibilities of a new democracy and political reform. The project proposes a 10-step framework that aims to reproduce queer spaces in the city of Beirut. A new grassroots campaign, Bait Akhar, is formed. Acting on the duality of heritage restoration and queer production, it aims to demarcate brave spaces of queer initiatives around the city. A gradient of spaces that operate within the spectrums of private to public, micro to macro, individual to commune, and offensive to defensive can be created within the existing structures. So the second act is to extract potential sites of intervention. The city of Beirut could be described as the Muradab Islands, a territory divided into fragments, each representing a specific agenda with specific religious affiliations, demonstrating its distinct social identity and way of life. Beirut is known to be rich with heritage buildings, representing the architectural glamour of the Ottoman and French Mandate eras. However, Article 26 of Lebanon's preservation laws dates back to 1933, legally obliges the Lebanese government to reimburse owners of buildings as classified, but the law only preserved monuments that were built before the 17th century. The blast interrupted what is known as the Hip Districts, specifically Manum Khail and Jinmezi, a place of heritage and migration. During my visit to Beirut in December, I took a walk around the destroyed area to witness the current state of emergency. As visible, most public buildings remain covered in scaffolding in order to survive, and are left in a derelict position awaiting funds for rebuilding. So what happens when there are no systems of care or rehabilitation? The mirrored depiction of a ruin and the other. Firstly, by introducing a grid to the chaos of the urban fabric of Beirut, the plots of land or parcels, and the radii of the impact of the explosion, building blueprints, sites rebuilt after the end of the civil war in 1990, where developers have demolished and rebuilt more than 30% of the city, buildings that were evicted pre-blast as part of new developments, plots that are below 100 square meters deemed unbuildable as sole plots, buildings that have received permits for demolition between 2014 and 2018, and finally, the impacts on the fabric of the city, where the densely hatched areas show the buildings that have been completely destroyed. The layering of plots highlight the most in need spaces that require care, and can potentially be made productive as spaces for queer initiatives. The representative site is tucked into the Ramaya block of the main street of Jinmezi. Only 700 meters away from the port, it sits on a steep topography and is nestled between a large range of trees. Through a conversation with the locals, I discovered that the house is owned by the aristocratic Sursut family, important figures during the Ottoman Empire. Since 1966, they have restored 8 19th century residences, 1 hammam, 2 early 20th century apartment buildings, and 6 gardens. The house itself is what can be described as a 3-arched house, or a central hall house, and was built around 1885 in the Neo-Ottoman style. At an elevation of 108 meters above sea level, the topography of the site obscures the views from the street and surrounding, leaving opportunities of privacy and misuse. The lowest floor sits within the topography and includes 5 vaulted rooms that extend under the garden. Originally stores or servant quarters, they are now part of the floor above. The central hall, or the lawan, acts as the buffer between the different spaces of the house. As the most public space of the house, it's usually flanked by 2 smaller lawans and supported by 4 columns on 2 sides and the balcony. The first floor currently has its own entrance and follows the same layout as the floor below. The roof plan. The fourth act is to determine the urgency of physical care required to the existing structures and their spatial possibilities. So the destruction caused by the blast, where the north and west facades were severely damaged, demonstrates the destruction, and by engaging with the complex geometries, the photogrammetry survey allowed me to consolidate with the destruction, identifying the structural requirements and their urgency. The main facade suffered the most damage. A secondary lawan was completely demolished, the stone walls destabilized, and the roof jeopardized. The key presents the urgency of each element, A to E, where the damage is classified in order from the primary structure to the internal detailed elements. These fragments are reproduced in order to understand the language of the existing building. The relationship between control and access are visualized, and the first design strategy is to redefine what these domestic elements function as, exporting them, reusing them, and redesigning them. How can you redesign and rebuild these spaces and create a shared platform that questions the heteronormative sphere? A ruin, non-functioning, where its inhabitants and plumbing are cut off, enters into the realm of sculpture. With the simple act of adding a chair or a table or even an instrument, the sculpture could perform as a shelter, shifting from content to container. The different tactics of heritage care are utilized to mutually deal with the delicate ruin and to fit the new purpose of the initiative. The boudoir and its implications are dissected in order to formulate the new program. The spectrum of privacy is exploited as a mechanism of visibility. The lower 2 floors serve as the public house, allowing for both occupants and members of the public to join, whilst the upper 3 floors provide the shared domestic. Ultimately, the spaces created are spaces of communication, where debates on public or legal matters or even private counseling can occur. The first method of restoration is a scaffolding technique. It initially serves as a frame for structural repair and then deals with the new proposed informal circulation. It mimics the function of the veranda, wrapping around the existing structure, and is accessible from the ground floor balcony and the garden. The permanent scaffolding reduces the height to allow for unobstructed views out of the house, and mesh curtains can then be fitted onto the grid where the views in and out of the house can be controlled. As an extension of the interior, the space is occupied and a group of others gather to debate the possibilities and complexities of change. Being a division of the public house, bodies that do not fall under the other are also able to have a view into what it means to be queer in Beirut. When the stripping is complete, fragments of the building, original windows, shutters, and woodwork, both intact and damaged, can be re-employed as a new passive house facade, infilling the destroyed walls. As the builder refloors the damaged Lewan, the other spaces emerge. As a modern technique during the 19th century, standard construction was heavyset bottom and lattice on top, where the vaults acted as secondary foundations. The interventions operate in the same way. Minimally invasive, they allow for the traditional to remain whilst exploiting the interior. A new streetscape is introduced onto Rougaud. The proposed elevation deals with the multiple elements of restoration: a scaffolding tactic, a patchwork infill, a new mezzanine level, and a new roof is brought to life while still mimicking the original. The ground floor operates as a public house, where an exhibition space, multifunctional, discussion zone, and private counseling spaces are situated. The reuse is manipulated by reducing the walls within the space and replacing them with columns in order to create an open space, both for fluidity and observation. The subject of queerness in contemporary Arabic literature is itself fraught. Whilst majority of countries in the area censor such books, a collection of texts that defy the hegemony of national and patriarchal orders allows us to question what sits outside these walls. I'm Here by Nadim Shufi is on, displaying archived Arab LGBT forums of lovers that never met, with moving images of common household frames. Discussions on the physicality of space takes place, being able to meet others like us. Public spaces remain intimate. A viewing of Libertad Beirut is on show. The space doesn't solely act as a protest, but epitomizes a public performance of visibility and liberation. Behind the screen, Noor Aoudi's portrait of the discriminated is presented. The first floor houses the intermediate and permanent housing, and elements of the shared domestic, housing vulnerable individuals who might have had some financial difficulties in previous homes. As discrimination against homosexuality is licit, the permanent housing provides a haven for those who do not feel comfortable renting from the Beirut market. A poster on a wall, they are here. The mezzanine level houses urgently in need bodies. The retractable partitions allows for more opportunity to stay when needed, or to act as an additional open space. It provides homeless youth, survivors of abuse, or people who have been kicked out of their familial homes to have a temporary refuge whilst dealing with their situations. The rooftop becomes a buffer zone between the collective and the private. Here, order is reclaimed as they formulate their sense of what it means to exist among the numerous physical and mental maps of an urban grid that is perpetually disputed by its various inhabitants. Finally, how can space be fluid? This choreography of spaces, operating within the spectrums, serve to place queerness in the new public sphere, questioning the norm. The architecture transcends into the background, whilst the objects become the space. From the object to the city, the more radical forms of change engage the most private spaces of the domestic and reach the most inclusive points of the public. As the cycle returns, Beit Akhar's initiative restarts, and these spaces of appearance, operating as a network, aim to challenge the heteronormative sphere whilst mutually rebuilding the neglected fabric of the city. Thank you.